What's an art museum?
It has paintings and sculptures and stuff like that.
Well, when I think of the art museum, I think of ancient art from past to present.
Like many, as I said, sculptures of Indian culture, Japanese culture, Chinese culture, different.
Weird figures, like they're like deformed or something. They have 6 arms or the head of an animal. I don't understand because.
I think that there's probably a great diversity of people that work in an art museum. Although most people are probably art majors who went through art. There are probably a whole bunch of business majors and.
I actually like the museum a lot. It's a nice environment, although it is different just because it's quieter. It's more low-key than a lot of the other places you might go to, more intellectual.
Well, I thought they were kind of a stuffy place where older people go to. It's not very exciting for people my age.
Sometimes I get frustrated with trying to understand art and always trying to be like I have to know what the meaning is and what I need to understand it, and I guess I'm trying to make a goal for myself just to go there and enjoy it without overanalyzing it too much.
What is an art museum? Well, that's easy. It's a place full of art, right? But what kind of art? And from where? And for whom? Art museums aren't just about the art that's on display. They're also about the people that work at the museums and the visitors that come to check it out. In this program, we're going to meet some of the people who work behind the scenes at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. Come on. You enter the museum through the Grand Court. It then branches off into different galleries. There's lots to see.
The galleries are divided by cultural areas or themes or by types of objects. There's lots of ceramics, metal objects, costumes, paintings, and some really interesting statues. Some pieces are extremely old, like this ancient Chinese bronze vessel in the shape of a rhino from the 12th century BC. In contrast, there are some that are very recent, like this show of paintings by a Japanese-American artist by the name of Teraoka. Collections are at the heart of any art museum, but where does this art come from? Meet Avery Brundage. As a young man, he competed in the Olympics. He then traveled around the world with the Olympic Committee. With money he'd made as a construction engineer, he then began to collect Asian arts. His collection is the basis of the Asian Art Museum. He gave it to the city in 1959, and this wing was added to the De Young in Golden Gate Park in 1966. The collections continue to grow through new donations and acquisitions.
Do you collect things? How many? 100, thousands? If you collected 1,000 things, where would you put them? In a storage room. Well, that's where we're going now.
So let's go look at storage.
Where are we going now?
To collections storage. You have to have special access in. Can I get you to sign our visitor
Ah, sure.
book?
Do I have to put my address?
Yes, please.
Wow, how many objects do you have in here?
Well, our collection is about 12,000 pieces, but we have about 10,000 down here, and about 10% of the collection is on view upstairs in the galleries.
So, Kathy, what's your job? Do you play with them, take care of them, clean them?
Take care of them mostly. I'm one of the registrars. We have 2 registrars. We're responsible for registering the objects. Objects get identification numbers. We're responsible for storage of the collection, maintaining the locations of all the objects in a computer database.
So let's just say I have a show from China coming here to the museum? Who would be taking care of it?
Well, the registration department would be the primary contact. We would be responsible for supervising the shipment of crates that the art is in into the building and all the handling of the art. My job specifically would be to supervise the packing and the unpacking and the installation of the art once it arrives.
This is a pretty big place. Now, how many workers are usually down here? Is it only you, Kathy?
No, mostly curators come in, they research their objects, registrars are in here. We're responsible for having photographs of all the pieces for identification purposes. Conservators come in here and look at pieces that need to be worked on before they're exhibited. Am I explaining what a curator does?
What does a curator do?
A curator is a professional that has a specialty in one area of art or another. And would you like to meet one?
Sure.
This is Therese Bartholomew. Stephen, how are you?
So, what does a curator do?
Well, a curator has to, is essentially what we call a keeper. You take care of the objects here, you study them, write labels, introduce them to the public, and meanwhile you look for new objects to buy for the collection.
Very valuable and delicate.
Yes, indeed they are. That's why we have all these sandbags, sewn in order to protect all the objects. They're all well packed. So during an earthquake, with all these sandbags protecting them, they're not going to shift too much. And here I'm going to show you something I study in my spare time. I like Yixing teapots. This is a teapot made in a place called Yixing, not too far from Shanghai. And tea drinkers of China swear that they get the best tea out of a Yixing teapot. It's very beautiful. You see, if you compare this to the porcelain behind you, see how they have glazes? Mm-hmm. But this is just the plain clay and has beautiful texture called pear skin. And people like to admire these teapots, and by holding it, rubbing it, pretty soon your oil gets transferred onto it. So they get shinier and shinier. That's what we call a beautiful patina.
Did you go away to study these?
I actually first studied it, in this museum, and then later on I was invited to go to Yixing, and last year I spent 10 days working in the factory. They're still making these teapots. And I'm going to show you an Indian piece.
It looks Greek.
You're right. It's Greco-Roman. Alexander the Great, when he tried to conquer the world, he actually went to India, which is now Pakistan and Afghanistan, in a place called Gandhara. He left the soldiers there. So after the Greeks left, the Romans came. And the people around there, they have artists' workshops. All they knew was how to make Greco-Roman statues of Apollo and all the Greek gods. So when the Indian kings were in charge of that area, they wanted to make images of Buddha. But all the craftsmen knew what to do was to make an Apollo. So that's exactly what you do.
He kind of looks like the Disney character Hercules, with all the jewelry and the long hair, heroic hair.
Well, that's exactly how you can tell him apart from a Buddha, because a Buddha is dressed like a monk with short hair and simple clothes. But the Bodhisattva can keep his long hair, his mustache, and he wears beautiful jewelry. And this is what we call, studying iconography, the study of images. You look at it, you try to analyze it, find out who exactly he is. So now I'll show you some fun things. These are snuff bottles. And snuff bottles are for holding snuff. And snuff is ground up tobacco mixed with spice. It is something the Westerners introduced to the Empress of China during the Qing dynasty in the 17th century. And the emperor was fascinated, and they made special bottles to hold the snuff. So when you take snuff, pretend, okay? There's a spoon in here, you take the snuff out, you put it on your hand here, then you take it up and you snort it, and then you give a big sneeze. It's supposed to be very good for headaches and for clearing your sinuses. And people like taking snuff so much that almost every man, especially Mongolians and Tibetans, they always, keep snuff bottles up the sleeves.
I like this one, that fish one. What is that?
Now this is what we call an overlay. It's a glass piece, milky glass with a green overlay, and you see a fish swimming above a lotus leaf. That is what we call a rebus, a pictorial pun. Because as you know, you're Chinese, there are many, many words, but not enough sounds to go around. So this is called 年年有餘. The lotus leaf stands for year after year, and the fish stands for plenty. So whoever has it is probably, somebody who wants to be rich. So somebody hopes that by holding this in his pocket all the time, he's going to have plenty year after year.
What about this one? It's not a fish, but it seems like children playing.
This one is painted ivory. It shows many, many boys playing together. In China, it's very important to have a son to carry on the family name. So this probably belonged to a man without any children. So he hopes that by carrying such a snuff bottle, he's going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 boys in the family.
Now, did the father make that himself, or was it someone else?
This would be a present from a friend who knew that he wanted sons, or he can specially order it from a shop.
As a curator, do you need to know all the different materials?
Yes, we do. For example, this one is jade, which is the hardest mineral you have to, for cutting. This is a natural pebble, but they hollow it so that you can put a spoon inside. This one's really fun. You see, Chinese always like to achieve high precision. That's why they push the children to study so hard, because in the old days, if you pass your civil service exam, then you don't have to worry the rest of your life. You become an official. See a monkey pointing at the sun, and there's a bee here. This means 吉日高升. That means very soon you're going to have a high rise you're going to rise in rank.
So it shows that art doesn't have to be gigantic or big to have a beautiful presentation.
No, small things can also be beautiful. And here you see a microcosm of Chinese art. You see all the materials used in Chinese art, iconography that you see anywhere else in clothing, in porcelain, in jade carvings. So these are really fun.
This is really beautiful. Thank you, Therese. Miss Dr. Michael?
Correct.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Are you a curator of Chinese art?
That's right. So I'm in charge of the Chinese collections here, which includes this magnificent group of bronzes that we're looking at today.
Is all the objects in here bronze?
All of them are metals of different kind. Metals, because they respond to environmental conditions, require different kinds of storage conditions than any kind of textiles or works on paper and such. So we're keeping them in an environment of below 40% humidity, which keeps them dry so they don't rust as metals as irons rust or corrode as bronzes corrode.
Today are we going to look at Chinese bronzes?
Chinese ritual bronzes, which covers a very specific area of the Bronze Age, from around 1700 to about 500 BC. And these are bronzes that would have been owned and used by people of high status at that particular time. Let's go look at some. So along with that humidity problem, we always wear gloves when we handle these things because they're very susceptible to salts in the hands.
Are these ritual objects?
Both of these are. One of them is a ritual musical implement. The earlier one is actually a food vessel, a bronze food vessel. And it's a very important piece, both for its stylistic content and development, but also because it has a very long inscription on the inside. And you can see that running down in a number of rows on the inside, which gives it a date. It actually talks about a particular high official who had served the Duke of Zhou, and that was he was a regent in the third reign of the Zhou dynasty. So we can date this pretty close to 1050 BC. Important things about bronzes of this age, there are a number of things. They're used as ritual vessels, but they are also the primary historical information. This long inscription gives us the history of the time. It tells us about a particular incident, about a particular people, the relationship, and so on. So we have a very interesting kind of combination of a valuable and important ritual object at the time, and an inscription which actually gives us the history of that time as well.
Where did these come from?
These pieces were, as important ritual objects of the time, they often ended up in tombs. They were not like funerary ceramics, which were specifically designed to go in tombs, but they were buried as part of what was possessed by the deceased who ended up in the tomb. So we'll find great numbers of them in tombs from various sites around China. Now, the design of the bell, which you can see is very elliptical in shape, gives it a special characteristic in that it has two tones. Each bell has two tones. So a set of 65 could have as many as 130 tones in it. Strike this and you'll hear. This bronze is actually in very good shape, but still very much bronze. So there's one tone struck in the middle. It would sound much better if it were hung. And another one which is struck on the side, which is higher. Hear how much higher that is? That's because obviously there's a greater mass of bronze here, not as great a mass of bronze here, so it makes it's like having a fuller cup of water. It makes it a higher tone here. They do add these bosses, and what they do is actually carry the resonance of the musical instrument. They're also almost always in 3 sets of 3, and those who study Chinese numerology and all that goes with that, those are very fortunate numbers. This is like the I Ching. The inscription actually gives us again a date, and that date is about 552 BC.
You're a curator of Chinese art.
That's correct.
How did you train to become a curator?
I went to graduate school in Chinese art history and archaeology, which took me a long, long time. Part of the requirements for where I went to school was at least 1 Western language and 2 Eastern languages, so I have abilities in Japanese and Chinese. Finished a PhD, and then I've worked in the museum field now for 17 years.
Thank you very much, Dr. Knight. It was really great to see all these ritual objects.
Real pleasure, Stephen.
Don't look at us anymore, just kind of head off.
Just walk.
Yeah. Don't look like you need a cue or anything. Okay, rolling.
You've seen the curators and registrars study and manage the collection, but to actually take care of it and keep it in good condition, that's the job of the conservators. Hello, I'm Rose.
Nice to meet you. I'm Tracy Power.
Nice to meet you too. So you're a conservator here?
Yeah, I'm an objects conservator. We actually have several conservators in the department that deal with the different materials. I do 3-dimensional objects, and then my colleague Julie does paintings, which are on silicon screen and paper. And then we have another conservator who works on textiles, and also a conservator who's temporarily here working on the jades with me. She's also an objects conservator.
So what are you doing here?
Well, right now I'm working on a project which is very extensive. It's an object called a money tree, and it would have been inside of a tomb, and it was believed that it would bring wealth to the owner of the tomb in the afterlife. It's called a money tree because on these branches there's depictions of coins, Chinese coins. It's a very elaborate object because it has a ceramic base, and then it has a trunk that goes up the center, which I'm working on there, and then there's also a multitude of bronze branches and finial pieces. So I'm working both to help in the mount making of this object, which is complicated because there's so many pieces, and especially in an earthquake active area, we have to make sure that if there's an earthquake, the branches don't fall off and break. And I'm also stabilizing many of the old repairs to the bronze.
Interesting. How old are all of these?
This object is from the Eastern Han Dynasty, so it's the early part of this millennium, so within the first 200 years AD. It's a very complicated research project when we get an object like this, and there's several different ways we can examine our objects. One way would be by testing the ceramic. So we can take a drilling from the bottom of the object or the inside and then send that off for analysis, and by looking at the radioactivity of that material, they can tell you approximately how long it's been since it was fired.
So what are these X-ray things here?
Well, we also have X-ray equipment, and like a doctor would look at your internal structure, we look at our object's internal structure. And this is the trunk of the tree, and we're looking at this in terms of mounting. Because there are so many different pieces, you can see on the table there, We'd like to tighten that up as much as possible. So the mount maker is working on this project with me, and he's drilling out the dirt up the center of these, and we're going to try to put a rod up the center of each of the different sections, and therefore stabilize the different ones. So what I'm trying to do is separate some of these sections which have become fused with burial salts and dirt. And to kind of direct me in my work, I look at these x-rays and I can see where the different sections end. The x-ray is lighter where it's more dense material, so you can see here's where there's a hole in the bronze, and it's more gray, and this is where there's more solid material.
What are these little patterns? Are they dragons on the trunk?
Mm-hmm. These are a series of dragons, and you can see where there's relief work on these, and the metal is thicker. You see white lines on the x-ray. You also see holes in the bronze where these are the gray areas. That's where the material is less dense. So by looking at the x-ray, it's very clear where the breaks are in the ceramic. You also see these areas that are dark. Those are less dense. That means that there is no ceramic material there. So these are areas that are filled with a less dense material. So, and then these darker areas are actually more dense, and it turns out that that's where glaze has puddled in cracks on the ceramic. You can even see little spots of porosity in the glaze itself. This is a really excellent x-ray. There's quite a lot of detail to it.
So your work is mainly scientific, isn't it, in what you do?
It's not mainly, but you have to have a science background to some extent. People who go into conservation have to take art history, art studio, and chemistry.
So, what's your favorite thing about your job?
Oh, I like that it's never the same. There's a lot of challenges, and I have to say I really like taking something that's in a lot of different pieces and putting it back together. There's a real sense of accomplishment there, and it's pretty concrete. So, and I work with a lot of interesting people. So it's a good field.
Hi, Rose. I'm Vicki Kassman, the Textile Conservator.
I am Julie Goldman, the Paper Conservator.
What is this art here, piece of art here?
This is a 13th century Tibetan tanka. It's a series there are 5 of these pieces, 3 of them belong to the Asian Art Museum. Basically, this painting part is a canvas that's been primed and then many layers of pigment built up to create the painting. So what often can happen in these paintings, because they're stored in a monastery where there's a lot of soot and a lot of moisture, is that the paint will flake and lift. And as in this area down here in the blue, and there was a loss down here, and over, where is that little Buddha? This Buddha here. So if the paint is lifting, what I try to do is get under it with a consolidant, with an appropriate adhesive, so that we don't lose any more paint than we've already lost.
And as for the textiles, we try and preserve as much of the original as possible. And as Julie said, these pieces were used, and they were often rolled. And textiles, especially silks, don't like to be bent and folded, and they deteriorate very quickly under those conditions. The monks usually traveled with tankas and rolled them to take them along with them. And so the silk often is very fragile and very deteriorated. And in this case, we've dyed a piece of fabric to imitate the original shape, to replace the lost parts. But we don't try and restore it. We just try and preserve what's there.
Yeah. What does this whole painting mean? What's it represent?
This is Ratnat Sambhava, who is one of the 5 transcendental Buddhas. And again, it's from a series of 5. And he's making the gift-giving mudra. I think he's a Buddha of wealth and prosperity. And these are 2 bodhisattvas on either side of him, beings that have chosen not to attain enlightenment in order to come back and help those who need help.
I think most of the work now would involve caring for it on exhibit, so that just making sure that the light levels are low enough so that we don't bleach either the paints, which sometimes are organic, or the textiles.
This painting is mainly organic pigments that have been ground up into probably some kind of animal fat. And it's a very prescribed way of creating a tonka. There's an underdrawing and lengths of arms and limbs. Everything is prescribed, and the colors that are used are prescribed. But again, the main problem seems to be with the lifting of the pigments. And also, I'm pretty sure this piece was cleaned before it came here. It had to be. I think there was yak butter lamps burnt in front of it, and somebody very carefully cleaned the soot off of it. And that could take, anywhere from several weeks to several months, because they work very small, just little areas, kind of cleaning with whatever solution is appropriate without lifting up the paint layer. That's very inappropriate.
What did you have to do to become conservators in this museum?
Well, there are formal training programs for conservation, and those are master's degrees, and there are certain requirements to get into these programs, and those usually include internships as well as chemistry and art history. So that's, and then you specialize once you're in the program in a particular area.
Thank you very much for talking.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rose.
Oh, the chooses the.
All right, we'll go from the top.
As you can see, a lot of work goes behind the scenes of an art museum. But who chooses these displays? Who decides on the exhibitions? Let's talk to the director of the museum, Dr. Emily Sano. Dr. Sano?
Yes.
Hey, how are you doing?
Hi. Are you Lorraine?
Yeah, I'm Lorraine.
Good to meet you, Lorraine.
Hi, I like the exhibitions.
Thank you.
How do you plan the exhibitions here?
These exhibitions? Well, we are in a permanent collection gallery right now, and the permanent collection are things, of course, that the museum owns. We choose works of art that fit themes, usually. Sometimes it's springtime, so we try to do paintings and garments and lacquerwares that might be expressive of spring. There are scenes of blooming flowers, for example, or picnic sets, or a kimono with flowers on it, things like that. I mean, they all follow the same theme. We also do exhibitions that are temporary. They come to the museum for a short period of time, and we sometimes have really spectacular, rare items in these that have been gathered from around the world, and we have a big surge of interest and focused activity just on this one exhibit. They come from abroad frequently. Sometimes they come from the United States. Usually there is one institution that organizes them. Sometimes it's us, and at other times it's other institutions. We had a wonderful show devoted to the art of Mongolia, for example, a country that no one even thought there was art there, We have shows that are devoted to a single artist sometimes. So the important thing is to choose a group of objects that have some consistency, that have a certain quality or come from a certain period, so that you can actually make a statement about culture with them. It's not just a scattering of nice pieces. You really want people to learn something or look at a certain kind of technique. And so exhibits are organized around that kind of intention.
Well, then, what themes interest you?
What themes interest me? Personally, I love religious art. And I've always thought it was interesting to look at how religions are different and how they're similar. So sculpture shows and shows of religious painting and ritual objects interest me a lot. I also like very gorgeous colored things, like these Japanese screens. So I love to see shows that have wonderful paintings in them. One of my other favorite things is lacquerwares. We get visitors of all ages, and we get visitors of very specific ethnic backgrounds, and we get visitors who have very different degrees of education. So we need to plan our exhibits and our activities so that we have a proper balance in our programming to appeal to all those visitors.
What sort of training did you receive to get in museum work?
Well, you know, I never planned to work in a museum, but I became very interested in the history of art when I was in college. I became interested in that because I visited Japan when I was a junior in college, and I noticed that my friends who were art historians always had so much to do. They had temples to go see and ceramics to look at and potters to visit. There was obviously a lot to explain with works of art. So I thought that was very interesting, and I wanted to get a degree then in art history, which I did in graduate school. And I completed a PhD in art history, in Asian art history. And because of my exhibition experience, I got into that field quite by surprise. And I love the fact that when people come to the museum, they learn about history, and they learn culture, and they learn about art objects themselves just by looking through the galleries and reading the labels and experiencing the objects in the galleries. And I think that's a wonderful way to learn.
I'm gonna crack it all through this thing.
So, you're ready to do an exhibition. You've done all your planning, and you've decided what kind of art pieces you'd like. What happens next? Who puts these art pieces up in your museum? That's the job of the preparators. So, Guy, you're the chief preparator, right?
Yes, I am.
So, can you tell me about your team?
Okay, our main function is to design, construct, and install the works of art.
I see. And can you tell us about what you're doing here today?
What we're doing today, this is part of an installation phase. Every 6 months, we rotate objects that are what we call light sensitive. That's works on paper, lacquers, and things like that. So what we're doing now is Chinese paintings that need a rotation.
So how many members are on your team?
There are 6 of us now. We have a designer, a lighting specialist, a mount maker, a construction specialist, so to speak, myself, and another preparator. The great thing, we all can help each other out, and we all know what to do, and so we can exchange jobs if need be. The designer works on with the curator in the planning, and figures out the layout of the art and the distribution of the art. And he determines colors, the traffic flow, and things like that.
Who would you say is the most important member of your team?
Well, we're all important because it takes that team effort to put this thing together.
I see how you handle paintings. Can you describe how you handle heavier objects?
Here's a good example of a large sculpture piece we recently installed. This comes in 3 sections. You got a base, a lower base, this lotus base, and this lotus base that the Buddha sits on, and then the Buddha itself. It's very heavy. It looks light, but it's solid ceramic. So we had to come in, you know, this is just one of those we do not rig, we just lift by our own strength. So, but we had to be very careful because of all these little objects sticking out here without breaking something off. So we get enough people to get in here and lift it in place one section at a time. This is also a good example of an earthquake mount you can see behind here, where we tie it to the wall, but tie it in such a way it's not stiff that it'll give any kind of earth movement.
Now, Jeannie, Vince, what are your jobs as preparators in preparing these pieces of art?
Well, the designer, before we begin our job, the designer lays out the objects and the type of design that he'd like to see them displayed. And we determine whether the pieces need seismic protection from an earthquake or or from other, if they need to be lifted slightly up just for display purposes, what type of mount they might need. In the case of a vase, a tall vase like this, we would want to lower the center of gravity so that it's heavy at the bottom, so that in an earthquake it would be less likely to tip over. That's the first thing we would do. And then if that's not enough, then we would put on a brace of, like this brace is brass, made of brass, and then we paint it to disguise it. And it's tied at the top with a little piece of fishing wire. And so there's weight inside. We put like lead weight inside. That's one way to lower the center of gravity. And there's also some wax at the bottom that prevents it from sliding on the case bottom. That's one method. It just looks like blue, but actually there's like 3 different blues in there. So yeah, you need to have a little sense about painting or color. I would say most of the making of the mounts is done before we're in the gallery, and then the finishing of the installation is done up here in the gallery. So,
How do you keep the bowl lifted from the pedestal? What kind of materials do you use?
There's just another metal mount inside there that conforms to the inside of the bowl. It supports the bowl and also keeps it from overturning.
We just met people from behind the scenes, and now we are meeting people that I messed up. We just met some people that works behind the scene, and now we're gonna meet some people that works with the public. This is a programs and marketing area, and their job is to involve the public at the museum. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Good.
So what do you do in the museum?
I'm the public relations manager here at the Asian Art Museum, and my job is to put a public face onto the museum, get people interested in coming, and basically just getting our name out there so people know who we are, what we do, and where we're located so that they can come and visit.
How did you get your job in the museum?
I got my job through, my background has been in public relations, marketing, and advertising, although most of my career I've done it for the high-tech computer industry here in San Francisco as well in Silicon Valley. But the basic principles of advertising marketing are basically the same. Working with the press to get coverage on different events, so whether it's print media or TV, radio, even now on the web, different ways of getting people interested in coming, working on advertising for different exhibitions. All of those things are basically the same, although working in a museum, especially an art museum, it's very good to have some sort of little background in art, and I minored in Asian studies in college, so I did have a little background there. So that certainly helped getting the job.
Hi, Gina. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So what do you do in the museum?
I'm the membership manager here at the museum.
Oh, so what is a membership program?
Membership program is made up of individuals who give $35 up to $1,000 in unrestricted funds. That means money that's not designated for specific purposes and helps the museum keep up its general operating fund.
I see. So how did you get your job in the museum?
It was actually a fluke. I was going through ads at a junior college looking for part-time work, and I found this ad for a temporary secretary position 6 years ago.
Oh.
And I started out at Pacific Asian Museum, which is another Asian art museum, and it just kind of built on from there. After that, I moved on to natural history, and I'm here. So
that's neat. That's very neat. So
serendipity.
So how many members are there in the museum?
We have approximately 13,000 members now.
So what do you do in your job on a day-to-day basis?
On a day-to-day basis, I plan membership campaigns. We are constantly in a state of flux. We lose members, we gain members, and in order to keep up our membership base of 13,000, we constantly have to have programs, acquisitions, renewals, and then in order to keep these members, we have a series of events to keep them engaged. I also manage the production for the museum's magazine, which is right here. Treasures. It's a quarterly publication, and we work with a designer and an editor, and then it goes out 4 times a year to our members.
So it only goes to the members, not to the public?
Yes, it's one of the benefits of membership, in addition to getting free admission and discounts and stuff like that.
Well, it was nice talking to you.
It was nice talking to you. Thanks for
Okay.
dropping by.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. When you come into an art museum, you might meet a staff person or a security guard, but a lot of people you see are volunteers. There are many types of volunteers. In one particular group, there are docents. So, hi Linda.
Hi.
You're a docent, right?
I am.
So what does a docent do?
A docent takes whether a public group or a school group on a tour of the galleries at the Asian Art Museum and explain the art objects in the galleries.
What did you do to become a docent?
I became a docent by going through a 3-year program taught at the Asian Art Museum. And after 3 years, you're certified to be a docent and lead a group or a public on tours.
What do you like most about being a docent in an art museum?
I enjoy meeting people, whether they are school children or public. And I really enjoy taking them through the galleries, all the different galleries that we have here. But especially the Korean gallery, because I have an affinity to the Korean gallery as a Korean American. And also because it gives me an opportunity to talk about the art that I love. But at the same time, I continue to learn from it. So that's the aspect of being a docent that I really love.
Hi Valerie, how are you?
Hi Reka, fine, thanks.
So, if I wanted to work in an art museum, what type of training or courses should I take?
Well, it really depends upon what your interests and what your background or skills are, Reka. As you've seen already through your journey around the museum, there are many, many different kinds of occupations here. I believe that you've seen curators and conservators and people that are in the preparation department. But I wanted you to also know that there are many other different kinds of backgrounds that people have here. We have an accounting department with people that are interested in finance and have the background in finance. We have fundraisers. We have a computer technology department, so people that are interested in technology also can work here. We have visitor services. We have positions of in administration, such as myself or other individuals that are interested just in business management.
What do you like most about working in the museum?
Well, what I like most is that it's the most interesting place that I've ever worked. After 25 years of working in all different kinds of companies and the public sector, the museum is never boring. It's a very exciting kind of place to work, and everyone that works here is very passionate about what they do.
So, are there many employees here working at the museum?
Yes, our staff has actually doubled in size in the last couple of years, and we're continuing to expand as we prepare for our move.
Oh, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Good luck to you.
Oh, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Most of the staff we've met so far work at the museum in Golden Gate Park, but some staff work in this office building downtown, preparing for the new Asian at Civic Center. What's the new Asian? Let's find out.
Okay. Come on through, Max.
Okay.
Okay, I'm rolling. Okay, we're rolling in.
Hi, is this the project office?
Yes, it is. They're waiting for you. Please go right in. Thank you. You're welcome.
Hi, pleased to meet you. My name's Max Blair.
Hi, I'm Langston Trigger, Project Manager.
Hi.
Max. Ann Dabovich, Development Director. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So, what's the new Asian?
Well, the New Asian is all about moving the Asian Art Museum from Golden Gate Park down into the Civic Center in the old main library building. We're doing this for several reasons. Number one, we need space, and we would like the opportunity to display our collection more fully. We'd like to be close to public transportation so people can get to the museum more easily. And we would like to establish our own identity. Many people confuse the Asian Art Museum with the De Young Museum, and they are two separate museums.
So your job is to design the new facility?
My job is to oversee the project, work with the architect, other consultants, and then work through the construction with the contractor and to build the facility. I sort of get to spend the money, and
I get to raise the money.
So starting, you're renovating an old building as opposed to building a new one.
Right. In fact, I have a model. Maybe I'll share that with you. It's This is a model of the old main library building. And all of the surface is protected by historic preservation requirements. But what we've done is taken the interior of it and created all new facilities for the museum. And so we can display art and have large public spaces in these covered areas. And that's sort of my job, is just to oversee this development and make sure that it gets built and try to get it built on schedule and on budget.
And Anne, what's your job?
My job is to raise the money for the new building. We do that with volunteers. We have 30 active board members and volunteers who work with us in visiting people, encouraging them to think about making a gift for this project. We have a number of staff people who assist by writing grants to foundations, contacting corporations and individuals. The wonderful thing about working on a project of this scope is that it provides the opportunity for donors to really think about what their interest area is. For example, this wing is going to have an educational center, and it's a chance to honor the donors who are involved by calling it the Fred Jones Education Center within the Asian Art Museum, within the Chung Moon Lee Center for Asian Art and Culture. So it's a wonderful way to really honor and recognize the people who are going to make the biggest difference to this project.
So Langston, when you were in high school, did you know what you wanted to be, or did you know you wanted to be an architect?
Well, initially, I know I loved to draw. I loved art, and I also was very well with mathematics, so the two come together very well for architecture. I also had a great deal of respect for the work of Frank Lloyd Wright, and so that was an inspiration for me. So about the time I was in high school, about the time all that came together, and I knew I did want to be an architect.
And you, did you have any idea?
Well, I was interested in art. I have to say I've never met anybody who is a professional fundraiser who thought when they were in high school or college that that's what they would end up doing. I think it's one of those professions where you take an interest area, whether it's the environment or education, and one scoots along in a career and discovers that it's a nice opportunity to use a lot of skill sets and enjoy working for a not-for-profit where you know your efforts are really helping the community.
Because remember, the most important... That's okay. I'm still rolling. So you can see that there's a lot more going on here at the Ancient Art Museum than meets the eye. There are lots of people working behind the scenes, people working with the public, and a lot of people planning for the museum's future. Now, the next time you come to visit the museum, here's some questions that you might want to ask yourself. Why is it important to collect, study, and preserve art objects?
When you look at an exhibition, think about why certain objects were chosen, what makes them special, what they tell us about the cultures that made them. If you were to create an art exhibition, what would you choose to display and why?
How would you promote the exhibition and get people of different interests and backgrounds involved?
Now look around you. How many people does it take to run the museum? Not just the staff, but also volunteers. So the next time you come to the Asian Art Museum, just focus on a few objects at a time and discuss what you see with your friends. Because remember, the most important thing about the museum is that you enjoy the experience.
In terms of places where you're trapped indoors to work, this has got to be one of the better ones.
And, you know, I just found it really, really, really interesting about the different religions and the different beliefs.
I'm normally not incredibly impressed by art museums, but this time it was more interesting because we got to see a behind-the-scenes look.
And become inspired to try and recreate things in my own art.
I personally think it's like one of the most educational ways to learn about a culture and a society.